Welcome back to Mystara, as we are spending this episode looking outside of Mystara, in fact, outside of the prime material plane. Mystara's relations with the outer planes is frosty at best, due to the immortals acting against the efforts of the various gods, archfiends, and extraplanar threats. The inner planes, on the other hand, have a more cordial relation with not just the immortals, but also several of the nations themselves. So why are tieflings hunted for sport, and genasi toasted at the most elite of Glantrine balls? I'm Mr. Welch, and we're headed to inner space. Mystara uses the same inner planes as other settings, including the main elemental planes, the ethereal planes, the positive and negative energy planes, and by extension the para and quasi-elemental planes. Those two were part of the AD&D line and never mentioned in Mystara books, but they slot in easy enough so that I'm including them for this video. Also included are various domains created by immortals, as well as the demiplane of nightmares, as it's apparently close to Mystara in the Great Wheel compared to the other settings. I'm also leaving out the demiplane of dread. While it does have some Mystaran representation in it, it's more of a prison, and while it's easy getting in, getting out of it is nigh impossible. Elemental creatures, unlike outsiders, have always been partial to Mystara. Numerous immortals originated on the elemental planes, including Terra, who ascended to immortality from an earth elemental. The immortals converse with their equivalents on the elemental planes, with the most powerful elemental immortals there called the Elemasters. Major credit in maintaining relations between the inner spheres and Mystara goes to Urtsun, the patron immortal of the Christ, a race of lawful elementals from the plane of Earth. Urtsun is also the patron of diplomacy, and was considered the wisest of his people when he was mortal. When a dispute comes up between Mystara and the inner planes, he is typically chosen as the mediator between the two factions. While he has no followers on Mystara proper, he is held in high regard by its immortals. Mystara receives a lot of visitors from the inner planes. Many only enter in gates found in isolated regions far from civilization. Creatures of water flock to the Great Bay's massive whirlpool, but it's so far to the north few mortals ever see them. Elementals of air frequent Etrugan's Island of Spirits, but these tend to be the malevolent types, like the sadistic Kalmaru or the bellicose Aeolians. They can't go far from the island, but they dominate the region where they can manifest. While these are great for adventuring against, they don't help the relations between elementals and mortals. Several nations have strong ties to the elemental planes, none more so than Alphatia, whose entire history is tied closely to the planes of air and fire. The Empire is now associated tightly to the plane of air, which allows them to create their large number of airships. The wizards will often simply open negotiations with various creatures of air to serve as components for their airships for a time, from simple elementals all the way up to the great skyworms. Many speculate that the blue-tinted skin of the Alphatian nobility shows a blood relation to air genasi, but that's just speculation, as the nobles have none of the abilities of that race. Alphatians are frequent visitors to the plane of air, and the denizens of that plane also return to Alphatia for their own reasons. The bureaucratic Anemo are common sights over the skies of Alphatia, though they are viewed as stuffy and uptight by the more chaotic Alphatians. The kingdom of Irindi has provided shelter for the Wizards of Honor Island, who in return protect the islands with their unstoppable fire ships. What few realize that Honor Island is not officially part of the nation, but instead it's considered its own nation that allows the Irindi to represent it on outside matters. The island hosts a stable gate to the plane of fire, allowing for the wizards to study the element in its purest form. Because of the stability of the gate, the island is frequently visited by all sorts of fiery tourists, including Efreet, the noble Helians, the militaristic Solix, and even rare creatures like the Azur or Salamanders are no strangers, though they are all expected to be on their best behavior when visiting. The ethereal plane is strongly tied to Mystara, by both the immortals and the archfey among others. Many explorers use it to travel to the inner planes, though access from outer planes is of course cut off by the immortals. Several powers have carved out parts of the ethereal plane for their own use, transforming their realm into something wholly different. The archfey formed the Good Kingdom, where they can indulge in their numerous pastimes. The Spirit Lords carved out their own realm from the ether with the Spirit World, a shadow realm that mimics the Prime Plane, with the spirits taking on the form of animals and natural features like rivers or hills. The Good Kingdom is primarily associated with Alfheim. While the realm can be reached from other locations, the largest number of portals can only be found within the elven borders. Likewise, the Spirit World has multiple points of access, but the World Mountain in Ethengar is the one known stable gateway. Of course, getting there is a notoriously dangerous risk, something that only the most faithful Ethengar even attempt. The inhabitants of the inner planes aren't common in Mystara, but depending on where they manifest, that determines their reception. The more humanoid an elemental creature is, the better they're going to be greeted. But some creatures have developed reputations for wisdom or power that mitigates their form. An ooze genasi or Jinn might get run out of a Raelan Threshold or Drimin, but in Vertalock they wouldn't even turn a head in a crowd. Glantry itself is obsessed with plain-touched creatures, and a savvy genasi might be able to become a prized visitor in the land of wizards, with not have to pay for a thing while getting passed from noble to noble as a house guest. One problem Mystaran nations have to deal with is when two species of elementals with a mutual history of conflict have their spat spill over onto the prime material plane. Efreet are a common sight in many of the cities of Yalarum, but they don't like the air-loving Jinn, or even worse, the Solux of their own plane. The war between the Efreet and Solux has gone on for centuries in their home plane of fire, but they have to control themselves when being outside their plane, as mortal society doesn't care who's at fault when both of them are burning down the city around them. Immortals aren't inclined to get involved in affairs with interplanar creatures, so it's left to the wizards to send defenders back home when a row gets out of control. Because of the relations with the interplanes and Mystara's expansive tourism industry, many intelligent elemental creatures will visit the known world to experience everything it has to offer. There's no formal process for this, though most of them head through gates or portals that have already been established. Honor Island is a well-known vacation spot for creatures of fire, though few leave the island on their visit. For those that do, the nation of Irendi treats them like any other tourist, with shows designed specifically for them. Serene is no stranger to creatures of air. Earth elementals are welcome in Rockholm, and the undersea kingdoms of Aquis or Aqua Rendi regularly host Merid and other elemental creatures of water. Truly adventurous genasi or Jinn have made names for themselves in the cities that welcome them, especially Calantri City. A genasi of magma would become very popular and wealthy in the fighting arenas of Thyatis, as the people there love all things exotic. For creatures that arrive from the inner planes created specifically by immortals, typically one of two things will happen. The creature will be so exotic that it can't survive on the plane, or it will be so mundane that it fits in without anybody noticing. Sentient thoughts can thrive in a plane specifically for them, but when they have new rules of reality thrust on them, it tends to end badly. Inversely, a human that came through a similar plane like Mystara will be treated just like a visitor from Kryn or Athos. A bit strange, but nothing to get dissected over. So, new week, and 2 new topics is apparently Eastern Scothar doesn't grab you, so how about some Megafauna or Mystara space? Or pick one of the 3 that are still up there. Remember to like and subscribe, as YouTube likes that and Wizards like that, and apparently I'm starting to gain just the slightest bit of traction and influence. But until next week, as God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.